Thank you, robot voice. And Danielle, I'm going to give it to you.
Wonderful. Well, Faith, thank you so much for getting us set up and for your help in preparing for today. I'm grateful to be here with all of you. My name is Danielle Johnson. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am happy to help to facilitate our conversation today on bisexuality being a whole identity. And I also, so one of the reasons why we wanted to be able to have this conversation about bisexuality being a whole identity is because sometimes when we talk about bisexuality or when it's discussed, it's, and not always, but there sometimes is that assumption or yeah, almost like assumptions made almost that bisexuality is somehow a step, not a stepping stone necessarily, but like a stop almost in preparation for possibly identifying as lesbian or gay or pansexual or asexual. So wanted to be able to have this conversation about bisexuality, what it means, and what it means to me myself, and to kind of unpack some things a little bit. What I'd love to do is share my story and share my story, which actually is, I feel like is a two-part coming out process. It was coming out as lesbian when I was 25 and then coming out as bisexual when I was 37. So I'm looking forward to sharing this story with all of you. And so just to kind of start us off, like, so generally bisexuality is considered or defined as attraction to both men and women. The thing is, as we kind of like stated a little bit before, and we'll get into this a little bit later, some of the assumptions made about bisexuality, and not understandably so, just can lead one to think that it's not a full identity and an identity that a person can fully embrace for the entirety of one's life. So I'll start off with my own story. So I live here. I am a Buffalonian. I was raised in New Orleans until I was 5 years old. My mom was from Buffalo. Dad is from New Orleans. Came back to Buffalo when I was 5 years old. And while here in Buffalo, so my mother was an artist, and she passed a couple of years ago, but mom being an artist really shaped who I am and shaped my understanding of what being LGBTQ means. My mom, when she moved down to New Orleans and she was 19 years old, it was a gay couple who offered her first internship in New Orleans. It was at the Historic New Orleans Collection, and the Historic New Orleans Collection is a museum in the French Quarter where the original bill of sales for Africans, for people of African descent, were held. And mom actually at 19 years old had the chance to hold in her hand the original bill of sales from our ancestors. And that really shaped who she was, who she is. I'm feeling moved to share her. This is her photo right here. And she is a lovely soul. She is an ancestor, but she is always with me. And thank you, Faith. She's definitely guides and leads in all that I do. And the thing is, so as I got older, there's always this understanding that people are allowed to be who they are. And that was growing up, my mom always said, all I want for you to be is happy, healthy, and educated. She's like, your life is your own, do what you want. And I embraced that, and I did. So as I went to, thought I was going to be a chemical engineer. I am not a chemical engineer, not by far. I loved numbers. I loved math. I thought that was going to be my path. It was not. I ended up majoring in humanities in college and in undergrad, and I got a master's degree in education, and my PhD is in higher education as well. The thing is, so my coming out process, I came out a little bit later in life. I came out at 25 years old. And I always knew growing up that I felt attraction to both. At the time when I was little, it wasn't men and women. It was I just knew who I was attracted to, and it wasn't based on specifically on gender. It was who I felt attracted to. And I felt attractions to both girls and boys. And that never went away. Excuse me. As I got older, once I really got into my doctoral program, that was when I started to embrace who I am. And I have mentors who identify as lesbian and gay, and they help me to understand and see that a person could live a full, whole, healthy life identifying exactly as they are. And it helped me to understand that people who identify as lesbian and gay and bisexual and non-heterosexual, really all they want to do is live good, healthy lives. All they want to do is raise their kids, have gainful employment, have fun, just have a regular good life. And that helped me to understand that it was okay to embrace myself for who I am. So at 25 years old, that was when I allowed for myself to accept to myself that I am attracted to women. And I had two longer term relationships with women between the ages of 25 and 37. So the thing is, so that was like my first coming out process. And as a doctoral student, one of my dear mentors, my dissertation advisor, she gave me the freedom to choose what I wanted to research. And I chose to research, my dissertation topic was the relationship between spirituality and sexual identity among lesbian and gay undergraduate students. So what that did was that gave me the opportunity and the freedom to read about the coming out process and lesbian identity and gay identity and the history of this research and what it means and the ways that like homophobia was villainized and criminalized almost, even not almost, how it was criminalized in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And that was really empowering to me because it helped me to understand at the time, identifying as lesbian, helped me to understand who I was and what that process means, and that it is firmly and fully okay to be who you are. And so with that research process, it gave me the opportunity to interview I had my research method was qualitative research. And what that meant was that I interviewed about, it was a good number of students, maybe 20 students who identified as lesbian and gay. And I narrowed that down to 10 that I included into my dissertation. And students between the ages of, I think they ranged from maybe 18 to, I want to say 22 or 23 possibly. They shared about their sexual identity and how it relates to spirituality. Students shared their religious experiences growing up, what spirituality means to them now, and how their sexual identity relates to what spirituality meant to them at that time. And that was just a really great, empowering time for me to be able to learn and to read, and then to be able to share their stories confidentially, with pseudonyms without divulging identities. But it gave me the chance to be able to share who they are, especially with people who are also want to help and be there for lesbian and gay students. So that was my coming out process, and it was a good time. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. The thing is, as I turned like 36, 37, I started to realize, well, wait a minute. Though I've been in these two longer term relationships, I still have attraction to men. And at first I blew it off like, well, that person, they're my friend and they're a great person, and I'm just probably attracted to their energy, and it's probably nothing more than that. And then it happened again. And then it's like, I started to realize, okay, so this is a pattern. This might actually be who I am. And I'm friends with my high school boyfriend, and we talk often. And he knows that I at the time I identified as lesbian. And he said, Danny, I love you for who you are. That'll never change. But he asked me, was what we had real at that time? Like, was it real? Like, did I mean something to you? And this was at the time when we had this conversation, I was maybe 36 or 37, and we had dated when we were like 14 through 16, but it was a question that he had, and it's something that he held dear because we meant a lot to each other. And I told him, of course, he meant everything. You know, he's a wonderful person. And the thing is, by me affirming that what we had was real, it helped me to understand that I didn't have to compartmentalize myself. I didn't have to choose one binary or the other. I could simply embrace all of it at the same time without feeling the need to put myself in any kind of a specific category. And that is what bisexuality has done for me. It has allowed me to simply be and live and fully embrace myself for who I am. Now, the thing is, so I said I would just kind of describe my coming out process. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to either unmic yourself or put them in the chat, however you feel most comfortable, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, or if there's anything you'd like to lift up and share, I'm happy to do that. So I described my coming out process as two-part. So I described the first part of my coming out process, that was coming out as lesbian, but then it was coming out as a bisexual woman. And to be quite honest, I was a little bit fearful of coming out as bisexual, especially among my the friends and the family who I had built really close bonds with, who identified as LGBTQ. Because the thing is, what I had feared was that my friends who especially identified as lesbian and gay would somehow feel or think that I was identifying as bisexual to be able to benefit from heterosexual privilege. So by me, having a male partner, who I have a male partner right now, I have a boyfriend, and I was afraid that they would feel that I was selling them out in the struggle. Still being able to identify with the LGBTQ community, but still being able to gain the affirmation from heteronormativity. And that was a concern for me. And I ended up having some really great conversations, and I initiated some conversations with dear friends who I had advocated with and who I had, we had tabled together at at Pride. And I just didn't want them feeling as though I had deserted them and that I was turning my back on them. So that was a big piece of my coming out process. And the thing is, right now, for myself, me living and identifying as a bisexual woman, the thing that I am firm in is the fact that even if the person who I'm with right now, if I'm with this person for the rest of my life, if I'm with a different man, I will always identify as bisexual, and I have the right to do that. And what this process has shown me is that bisexuality is not a stepping stone, and it is not kind of like a timeout period to figure out who you are and then be able to progress on one's journey. Now, the thing is, we understand the fluidity of sexual identity, and we have the right as human beings to identify in any way that we want to. No one has the right to force an identity upon us. That's why, we call it self-identity, because we have the right to identify in any way that we choose. The thing is, with bisexuality, we do have the right to be able to hold it and affirm it and not feel as though we have to somehow circle back and check a box at some point. We don't have to do that. So just really encourage for anyone who might identify as bisexual, or who might think that they identify as bisexual, to own it and to feel comfortable in it, and to never feel any pressure to have to choose like one side or the other. There is no need for that at all. Now, some things that, one of the things that I learned in my research, especially when reading about bisexuality, which is something that I had the chance to refer back to and call back upon, is so at a few colleges and universities, specifically like at UCLA, ACLU is an organization that fights for injustice. I'm mixing up my acronyms, I'm so sorry. At UCLA out in California and at Brown University in Rhode Island, there were within the undergraduate student LGBTA organizations, some of the students who identified as bisexual chose to create their own bisexual student alliance organizations on campus because they felt as though they didn't quite belong. And some of the things that I kind of spoke about before, kind of like some of the students asking the bisexual students, just like, are you trying to benefit from heterosexual privilege? And like, it's kind of like wanting the best of both worlds, like wanting the affirmations from the outside world, from society, but then still being able to identify as marginalized. And some students who identified as bisexual decided to create their own organizations to be able to provide spaces for themselves where they could flesh out and talk about what they, and be able to kind of live in that identity without feeling pushed to identify in any other way. That is thankfully something that I have not had to, have not felt the pressure to do over the past, I'd say, year or so, but it definitely was a concern for me when I first came out. So in terms of the identity itself, when reading about some of the theoretical kind of like, so with a lot of identity, discussion about identity and understanding identity, they kind of like sometimes describe the process, the coming out process as in stages or in phases. And with bisexual identity, one of the theories that a good number of people have kind of pushed back on have kind of described bisexuality as so there's almost kind of like an endpoint. So with lesbian identity development, gay identity development, there is like the beginning stages are more of kind of like the exploratory stages or the beginning processes of understanding oneself. Then the final stage or phase is kind of like an acceptance of self and synthesizing that gay or lesbian identity into the totality of who that person is. But with this in particular theory on bisexual identity, the final stage, which with gay and lesbian identity is more of like a synopsis of like synthesis into oneself. The final stage in bisexual identity was confusion and uncertainty. And so if the final stage in a theory shows uncertainty and confusion, then that could lead one to think if they do identify as bisexual or did identify as bisexual, that somehow that they were not complete and that their journey in that particular identity was not done and that there was more for them to do. And so understandably so, there were a good number of folks who pushed back and said, well, that is not necessarily the case. That no one has to necessarily do that. So just wholeheartedly encourage for anyone who might identify in that way to fully embrace the identity for what it is. Sorry. So that has been a really kind of like empowering part of my journey and my process. Does anyone have any questions about bisexuality in and of itself or what it means in any way? And if not, that's okay. So when preparing for today and thinking about this being a whole identity, over the course of one's life, a person might change how they identify in terms of sexual identity in several ways, in multiple ways, in multiple times. And however many times a person might change and shift their identity, it does not in any way take away from the like the fullness of who that person is. And that is really important for anyone who might identify that way to understand and to embrace as well. And in terms of bisexuality in and of itself, the identity, So when we talk about sexual identity and like sexual orientation, right? However a person or you, however a person might, identity is not necessarily directly connected to feelings and behaviors, and simply because you have an attraction to um, a person of the same sex or a person of the opposite sex, it does not automatically mean that you must identify in that way. And just want to make sure and be clear that with identity and with any type of self-identity, that you know that you have the right to identify in the way that feels right, that feels most natural for you. As we progress, as we continue to kind of like make meaning of who we are, and even if bisexuality, that the identity and the label does not feel most salient, that's okay. Just want for anyone who is on their journey to know that they are not, you're not in any way required to answer to anybody about your identity as well. One of the aspects of the coming out process that can be a little bit stressful and a little bit stressful, but then also affirming and joyful. So one of the theories, so there are a couple of researchers named Ruth McCarn and Susan Fassinger, I believe. I may have inversed the first names, but they have a gay and lesbian identity theory where they basically describe the coming out process as both an individual process and as a group process. So, or not group, but like a community, kind of an outward kind of like identification. And the thing is, when thinking about and having reflected on that theory, it really does apply to bisexuality as well. It applies to identity in a lot of different ways. So the thing is, with the basis of that theory is that, and it applies to life, and it applies definitely to how we identify in terms of our LGBTQ identity, is that there is accepting ourselves for who we are internally to ourselves, but then there also is that coming out process and how we identify with a group and with a community as well. So that definitely it applies, and it definitely applied to my coming out process as well. The process of coming out as bisexual, as to myself, felt freeing. It felt very free. I felt unrestricted. I felt as though I didn't have to force myself into any one specific category, and that was really empowering. And it allowed myself to, and as we grow, one of the things, the lessons that I'm learning, so I'm 41 years old, right? One of the lessons that I have learned and am learning is that we are the totality of our entire lives. And who we were, sometimes it's like as we get older, we start to reflect and realizing that sometimes we might feel like different people at different points in our lives, and that's okay. The thing is, even if we might feel like different people, because we're in different phases of our lives, we're doing different things, we have learned different lessons, and we are, in essence, I have a friend who described it, we become different versions of ourselves every 3 years. So it's like every 3 years we shed our previous skin and we become a new version of ourselves. So if we think about that, and if we become different versions of ourselves as we progress throughout our lives, that applies to everything, including sexual identity. And even if we still identify with the same, for lack of a better term, the same label, we might feel differently about it. It might mean something different to us as we progress and move along. So when I came out as bisexual to myself, it was an empowering process. And it helped me to embrace my whole life. At some points when I was a little bit younger, like when I was 25, 26, and when I had first come out as lesbian, I felt a bit of shame because it took me a little bit longer than it had some other folks. And I kind of felt like as if I was, and at the time when I did come out as lesbian at 25, I felt a sense of disappointment in myself because it feels like even though I knew how I felt in terms of attraction, that I was not embracing it, and that I was benefiting from heterosexual privilege without even acknowledging and accepting who I am. And that felt unfair. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone who was not being authentic and real. So at that point, during that coming out process, there was a sense of almost like accountability to myself. But then a little bit later, when I came out as bisexual, that was when I was able to embrace and accept all parts of who I am, and that all parts of who I am were great, were good. You know, some some not so great, but for the most part, I have the right to embrace who I am, and without reservation and without having to qualify anything. And that felt really good. And it also was freeing in that no matter who I might have chosen to have a relationship with, I didn't have to change my identity because of it. That gave me a real sense of freedom. And at this point in my life, I do feel that, though I will have the longest term relationship from here on out, I do feel will be with a man, but it does not, I don't want to change my identity to heterosexual because that's not who I am. I don't want to negate who I was, and I don't want to negate and take away from the experiences that I had before because they are a part of me. Now, the coming out process with community and with that social aspect, that was something that I was nervous about, that I spoke about before. That sense of feeling as though I would disappoint my friends who I had, where we had challenged and spoken openly about homophobia and heterosexual privilege, and how unfair the treatment is and has been to folks who don't identify as heterosexual, and that process of coming out, how unfair all of it is. I feared that they would feel as though I was abandoning them and turning my back on them, and somehow wanting to lessen the weight of what homophobia is. I really worried about that. And it took me a good maybe a good year and a half before that calmed down. And I felt comfortable in the fullness of my identity and to say how I identify. So I'll share something. Thankfully, I still have really great friends who are the same friends that I have when I identified as lesbian, as the friends that I have now. The thing is, those first few social interactions or those first few social gatherings with people who knew that I identified as lesbian and now identifying as bisexual, and navigating those spaces, and without like with a bullhorn, hey, I'm bisexual now. Just like, it's like, first off, really nobody cares. Like, okay, God bless, good for you. But then it also is, wanting to be authentic with your friends and people who care about you, and wanting for them to know who you are and for them to be on your journey, and to not feel as though like you have to hide any part of yourself. Because if you were authentic with them then, you be authentic with them now. So that process of, the subtle kind of updates or having one-on-ones with folks and sharing what's going on, people, well, the one thing that I realized is that people just want you to be happy. People want for you to live in your truth. And at the core of it, they want you, like they love you. And one of the things that I realized is that when people really care for you and they love you, they love the soul, they love the person, they're going to accept whoever it is that is presented to them, especially from a place of authenticity. And especially when, we share, I do care I care how you feel. I care what you think. I care about our relationship, but this is who I am. That definitely goes a long way. This is a good question. Can you define heterosexual privilege and why that might be a negative thing? Absolutely. I'd be happy to share that. So heterosexual privileges, they're both kind of subtle and outright affirmations that are given to people. So a couple of examples of heterosexual privileges. So let's say in the workplace, right? So in another term would be like heteronormativity. So it's kind of like what is deemed as normal, right? What is kind of deemed in society as normal is from the ways that we are conditioned as young people from the time that we are young, like pink is associated with girls and blue is associated with boys, and there are certain behaviors and ways of being, and ways of navigating the world that, how a person is born, regardless of what their actual gender identity is, and that every person has the right to determine that. But from birth, we're told what we should and how we should be and what we should do. And in the same way, that heteronormativity is the almost expected ways that a person would build a family and who one would be attracted to. Forgive me, I'm so sorry. I'm gonna keeps buzzing. The way that we're expected to build families and the ways that we're expected to raise children. So that's what kind of heteronormativity is. So then heterosexual privilege is, let's say in the workplace, when, so in social gatherings at work, when people talk about their families, heterosexual privilege is when a man and a woman, let's say a person who identifies as a man, a person who identifies as a woman, either might get engaged or get married or have children. And there is no reservation of what people will think when they share this news. So it's kind of like the having no qualms about what people will think or how it will be received. It's almost the assumption that when there is a building of a family between a heterosexual couple, that it will be met with excitement and congratulations and warmth. The thing is, so with that heterosexual privilege, when a same-sex couple or a couple with trans and cisgendered person or something that is not of the norm, and the thing is, and I use that term in air parentheses because what is normal is what a person is. Normal is a person's truth. But what is the heteronormativity comes in is, so let's say if there is a person who identifies as lesbian or gay or pansexual who is getting married. And let's say, for example, that person might have one trusted confidant at work that person might know that they are getting married and about to engage in and enter into a same-sex marriage, but the rest of their coworkers don't. And the thing is, those coworkers could be very supportive. Some of those coworkers could be neutral and just say, oh, okay. Some coworkers could be outright hostile. The thing is, not knowing and having to almost emotionally prepare for how your coworkers would react to your news and not being able to freely say it and share it, and having to think about not only what the reactions of your coworkers, but what it could mean for your job as well. Because unfortunately, though their progress has been made, there still is this underlying threat for when people come out. What would that do for them in the workplace? So that's what the heterosexual privilege means. And I'm sorry for being a little long-winded with the explanation, but it is the privilege where not having to think about and not having to worry about the repercussions of or the consequences of sharing your truth and what it means. It also is the heterosexual privileges if a person might be married and have a family. And if there are discussions, because sometimes, again, in those work environments, people have in their, so that's like an outward kind of like example of kind of heterosexual privilege. The subtle ways are, let's say if in an office, we've been working from home, a lot of people have been working from home lately, but before the pandemic hit, and, hopefully, when we get back to some sort of a sense of being able to be physically connected or physically close. But we'll go with the example of before the pandemic. If you walk into someone's office and you see two, I don't want to even make it the assumption of gender, but what might be assumed as two women together in a picture or two men together in a picture. The questions of, oh, is that your sister? Is that your cousin? Is that your daughter? But then when you see a picture of a man and a woman together, the automatic kind of like the heterosexual privilege is, oh, is that your spouse? Is that your partner? Is that your better half? So it is the sometimes those assumed responses, those automatic responses, kind of lend to showing us how we are able to respond in those moments, and how a person the assumption that a person makes when they see photos in your office, or when your mate, your spouse, your partner maybe wants to take you to lunch and comes to your office and comes to your job. That's kind of like a big thing as well. When a person's better half, shouldn't say better half, no one is better than the other. When a person's spouse, a person's partner comes to the office to maybe take them to lunch, or maybe deliver lunch, or just to come by and say hi, and the introductions of who this person is, without necessarily knowing, again, if you might have one or two people who you have taken into your confidence and who know who you are, but without knowing like the culture and the temperature of that particular work environment as to how open and accepting they are, when that person comes, it could lead to that stumbling. It's like, okay, this is my, now for some folks, it's like, this is my partner and this is who they are, and accept it or not, this is my person. The thing is, and unfortunately, part of this kind of leads to like discussions of capitalism and what that means, but it's just to have gainful employment. Our livelihood, unfortunately, does depend upon money, and it depends upon being able to take care of oneself and one's family, and especially when people have families and are supporting family, whatever capacity that might mean. So when that person, that partner, that spouse who could be same sex comes, what heterosexual privilege means, when that person comes and you're not sure about how the work environment is and how that person will be received, it could be nerve-wracking and somewhat threatening to say, okay, this is my partner, and to say it. And the thing is, whether it be subtle or overt, not knowing what could happen the following day, the following week, the following month, what might come of it, that is where the heterosexual privilege comes in. And it can be scary. And the repercussions could be anywhere from a coworker, meaning well, but when you're in the middle of a workday, coming and saying, so, and wanted to have like a philosophical conversation about same-sex marriage, and wanted to have like these which are great conversations, but sometimes it's just like when you're in the middle of like a work day and you're trying to get your work done and you're trying to be productive and show I don't say your worth, but your productivity in the workplace, and someone comes and asks you these questions, it can be a little bit, it can kind of throw you off a bit. And especially if it's a person that you might not know well. And they might have great intentions, but like if you have a deadline or a report that you're trying to write and your boss is waiting for something, and this, well-meaning coworker comes up and asks, so this thing, same-sex marriage, like I get it, but I have questions. What does that do to a person? And then after the conversation, where is that conversation going to go? Who else will hear? So it's just there's a lot to it, and I appreciate your patience and this long-winded response, but there's a lot to heterosexual privilege in that way. And the thing is, it doesn't come from a place of malice. It comes from something more systemic. The way that, in terms of systematically, in the way that all of us collectively in society are conditioned to think about things and expected to be, and like norm. So I have curly hair. My hair grows curly out of my head. It's been this way since I was born. And the norm is straight hair. Like the norm is to straighten my hair. But I choose not to. And it's something that I have going on 5 years of me not straightening my hair. So that's kind of like what that norm can sometimes mean. I do see another question that, direct, that was a great question. So I appreciate that. How can I easily explain bisexuality to people who might not be as open-minded? So a way of explaining it is a person who values and enjoys having a connection, a deep connection, and you can just use the word connection because people can, in relationship, having a relationship with and attraction to people who are of the same and opposite sex, and that maybe the piece to include is that there is no struggle to feel as though you have to choose one side or the other, or choose one gender to be fully committed to having a relationship with one or the other. And in terms of the open-mindedness, so this is one thing that I would really encourage all of us who are here and anyone at all, in terms of that open-mindedness. That's something a person has to be ready for. And if they are asking genuine questions, that's one thing. And to have the conversation to whatever degree feels right for you and where your boundaries are affirmed and respected, that's okay. But in terms of if they're not at a place where they want to understand it more, or they have their own feelings and thoughts about it, that's okay too. One thing that the advisor that I spoke about a little bit earlier, who gave me the freedom to do my research on lesbian and gay students, one thing that she said, oh gosh, I taught with her when I was 24. That was 16, 17 years ago. I'm not doing the math right, but it was a while ago. And I remember my first time teaching with her, and she and her partner had been together at that time, maybe 20 years. And she said, Danielle, all we can do is just offer information. All we can do is plant seeds and let people feel how they feel, and let them come to, let them change their mind. If they choose to change their mind, change it at their own pace when they are ready. Because anything other than that, number one, it really wouldn't be sustaining. Like if we try to force someone to change their mind about something, it might give them something to think about, but they're going to feel how they're going to feel. But it is, if they're not quite ready for that yet, one way of responding is to say, I'm happy to have this conversation with you. Would you like to have a conversation and a dialogue? If your sense is that it's someone who's trying to convince you of the otherwise, you can just say, you know what, I appreciate the fact that you want to have this conversation. This is something I'd prefer not to, engage in at the moment, but maybe at another point and at another time. So it's kind of putting a comma in the conversation, so as not to say, thanks, but no thanks, bye. You don't have to say that, but you could protect yourself and protect your own well-being by saying, I'd like to have this conversation, not right now, but at another time. And when the person might approach you, or if the conversation organically comes up again in your senses, that they are open to understanding and learning and understanding what bisexuality is in another way at another time, then that is when I would suggest that you, or advise that you have that conversation. But it is essential, in essence, it is an openness. And it is not feeling as though one has to choose a specific gender to feel attraction to, and that bisexuality is the identity without the need to qualify even after that.
So I do just want to give like a preface. We do have only 3 more minutes left together, which I just want to extend another thank you again, Danielle, for coming and talking today because this is such an important topic and something that we do not touch on enough. And I can hopefully speak for us all here that we really appreciate you coming.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm grateful for the chance to be with everyone. In virtual, I'm realizing the power of virtual gatherings, and to be here with all of you virtually has really meant so much. So thank you so much, Faith.
Mhm. Does anybody have any last minute questions for Danielle before we switch over to the next workshop? This is always when I want like the Jeopardy theme music, like the doo doo.
Oh. Yeah. And if anyone has any questions even beyond today, Faith has my contact information. So um, oh, thank you so much, Michelle. I so appreciate you being here. And it's been a joy to be here with you and everyone.
Yeah, so if anybody after this workshop would like to contact Danielle, you can reach out via any of Gliss's work emails, anywhere on our website, and we will be happy to put you in contact.
Wonderful.
Awesome. So I'm going to stop the recording and the robot voice is going to talk again.